Hi, it's Kristen, and it's time for another Feminist Friday. This time I'm going to be reading Three Women by Lisa Taddeo. This one is about three women, and it's a non-fiction, but from the sounds of it, from what I've heard other people talk about, it's written in a way that almost feels like a novel, like a fiction story. But yeah, it's from the perspectives of three women who the author interviewed over the course of several years, and each woman is talking about like sexuality and sexual desire within their lives and how that affects them as a person, how they identify within that, how it affects their relationships with men, presumably. Yeah, I've just heard interesting things. I got this in a subscription box a while ago, so I sort of wanted to finally get around to reading it. I had heard about it before I got it in the subscription box and had been intrigued, so I was very happy when it was one of the books in the subscription box and I had my own copy of it. But yeah, I've heard a lot of good things and I've heard some very mixed things, so we will see what I think of this. I love this cover though. I think this cover's very striking with this like bright like neon greeny yellow colour and then the fruit in the background, so the cover very much captures my attention. We will see if the stories do. I will let you know what I think throughout. So I've started reading Three Women by Lisa Taddeo. I've read the intro by the author, and then I've read a chapter in each of the perspectives of each of the three women. I will say right off the bat, a lot of stuff to do with sexual harassment, sexual assault, grooming. Yeah, so those are themes. I knew going into that those were things that were going to be talked about and discussed in this book. But it is right from the get-go, literally like first sentence. So be aware of that if you were thinking of picking this up. And that was one thing I did see in a past review, that someone said like this is supposed to be about sexual desire and sexuality and that kind of thing, but actually a lot of it is just not so much sexual desire but just like sexual abuse that has happened to these women and how that affected them and their sexualities, rather than like them feeling desire and experiencing their sexuality for themselves in like a fun or an open or a light-hearted learning kind of way. Actually, it's very heavy and a lot of it is quite negative in terms of their experiences. So, yeah, I knew this was going to be a tough read going into it, but if you didn't and you were thinking of picking it up, that is definitely something to note. I'm only, a little bit in, so I feel like I can't say much about the narrative so far. I like the writing. It does sort of feel like a fiction story, so I definitely agree with the people who've said that. That it, just feels like we're telling the story of these three women rather than them, than it feeling like an interview with them. So I'm liking the narrative style of it. I think it makes it quite easy to read, in terms of like getting through it, not easy in terms of subject matter. But I don't want to say enjoying it so far, but I'm liking it so far. and I'm looking forward to getting further into it, and I'll give you an update when I do. So I didn't say it at the top of this video, but I am going to say now, I am going to be talking about spoiler-y things, just so I can talk about the book as a whole and what happens in the narrative and the women and their stories. So I am just over 100 pages into Three Women. We've had perspectives from all three women now. We've had a couple of perspectives from two of the women. So far we have Maggie, and her part is split in third person in the past, in which she has a relationship with her teacher, and her like second person voice, present day, or like from like when she's telling her story of going to court and like the court case around that grooming relationship that she had. So that's obviously a tough read, because there's also another inappropriate relationship with another older man in her history as well. Then we have Lena, who when she was a teenager had a really horrific experience involving several of her peers sexually assaulting her, and then her as an adult in a sort of failing marriage, and she's trying to sort of claim some of her sexuality, and her husband's just not interested, it seems, in sex and having sex with her. So she starts an affair with a guy that she knew when she was in high school, and who she had a bit of a thing with, but who they called off whatever burgeoning relationship they had after what happened to her as a 16-year-old, because of all the rumours going around school. So she's reconnected with this man. And then we have Sloane, whose narrative starts when she's in her early 20s, and she meets this chef at a restaurant, and then she starts working at the restaurant. She gets into a relationship with him. They get married, they own their own restaurant, and they've just embarked on a new sort of part to their relationship where they are now inviting other people to sleep with them. So it says at the beginning that she sleeps with a lot of men while her husband watches sometimes, or tells her what to do. I've not got to that part yet. So far she and her husband have just had a threesome essentially with someone who works for them, a younger waitress at their restaurant. But it's obviously going to develop into more. So yeah, three women with very complicated, seems, sex lives. Yeah, a lot to do with sexual assaults and rapes and uncomfortable sexual experiences. So I think I said before, just be aware of that if you're even thinking of picking this up. Yeah, it's a tough read, but it reads fairly easily in the way it's written. I think I said that before as well. And yeah, I'm not enjoying it, but I'm finding it interesting, and I do take interest in each of the women's storylines. There's not one of the women that I don't want to read about, I will update you when I'm further in. I'm like a third of the way through, so maybe I'll get like another third of the way through and update, or I'll update when something's happened that I feel like I want to speak about. So I read a bit more of Three Women this morning, and I've just been out on a walk, and I was like thinking about what I've read recently, and so I thought I'd just do an update now that I'm back. So my problem with like what I'm reading at the moment, or like the past couple of chapters, is that I've just found them so frustrating, but like in a very real way. So we had another chapter of the woman who's having an affair, and that was really frustrating to read because she's just talking about this guy that she's having an affair with and how like things progressed, how he started like not responding as much or being very like flippant, and how she was trying to like always like manipulate ways that they'd see each other. Like she messaged him being like, I'm getting rid of some of my kids' toys, like do you want them? Let's meet up. And then would like turn that into let's have sex once they'd actually met. And then he'd respond really flippantly again the next time she messaged. And it's just frustrating because I'm reading it like, girl, come on. But it feels very real in that I know I've felt like that towards like friends who are in situations with guys where I'm like, please, like, come on. Let's learn self-confidence, self-respect. So that was frustrating to read. And then this past chapter that I read this morning was a Maggie chapter, and she's the one who I was gonna say had a relationship with her teacher. No, she was a victim and manipulated by her teacher into a, you know, grooming relationship. But we're like her in her 20s, like early 20s I think, and she's actually like admitted what happened and is viewing it differently. She like told her parents everything that happened, and she decided to take it to the police, and we're going through like the court proceedings now, and it's so like sad but not shocking. Like I get angry every time I think about this situation, even though like it doesn't surprise me anymore when victims are treated badly by like police or lawyers or like in the court and stuff. Like it doesn't surprise me. It's really fucking sad. And makes me so angry, and I'm angry every time, even though there's part of me that's just like, here we fucking go again. Because I'm so sorry, I'm sorry so much. I get irate about it. But like we have her like giving her testimony of their relationship, of what happened between them when she was, you know, 17 and he was an adult. I think he was like 29, 30. And so she's giving like her side of things with, you know, little evidence that she does have. And she gets like a couple of character witnesses in her friends who are like, yeah, she was really like depressed and quiet and stuff at the time, and we always wondered like what was going on, and it turned out it was this, and like that's the character witnesses she gets. And then he gets like 15 character witnesses, most of whom are women, all going, well, he, you know, like former students going, he never did that to me, so I don't believe it. And like other teachers who Maggie knows from like the time that it was happening had some suspicions, or like questioning things, or definitely like saw them together.
enough to like infer that something was going on, and they're all going, no, like, have no idea, never thought that I would have done something if I had, and stuff. And it's like, you fuckers just know that something was going on, but you never did anything about it, and you don't want to admit that you never did anything about it because you should have. So you're just saying that nothing happened. Or like, you're friends with this guy and you don't want to like blow up his life, even though Maggie's life is like awful. And she, in the book, like talks about how she was like very depressed and how like nothing was going well for her, and she really like struggled in like further education and jobs and like maintaining relationships and things because of everything that happened to her. And also just like had a really fucked up like family home life as well. Around that time with like stuff with her dad. And it's just infuriating that these like adults just like blame this woman who at the time was a child. And it makes me irate to read it. And like that's in a lot of their storylines of all three women. There's like really sad stuff to do with like their sexualities and like things that have happened to them, or like the way that men have treated them, which I think is the reason why I picked this up, thinking like I want to read more non-fiction, but I've heard this reads like fiction, which it does. I maintain that it's very well written, in that it's very easy to read in terms of like the writing is easy to read, but it's not been a quick read for me. It's taken me, honestly, since I started this video, nearly a month to get through it. Because as I'm reading it, like it's easy to read, but it's so frustrating and disheartening and sad, and like just makes me feel bad when reading it, that it's taken me so long to read. And it's a difficult thing to read in terms of like the content of it. So when I'm reading it, I'm, you know, getting through it and not enjoying it by any means, but you know, liking it well enough and thinking it's well written and it's engaging and stuff. But then when I put it down, I don't really want to pick it back up, because there's been just like nothing fun, like nothing nice about it. It's just, yeah, full of like these sad moments in these women's lives of just like men treating them badly, people manipulating them, people taking advantage of them, whether it's like emotionally or physically. And it's just like, here's another messy relationship, here's another horrible thing that happened, here's some like horrible family stuff, here's some horrible relationship stuff, here's this dude who's doing this shitty thing, here's this woman making another bad choice. And it's like, I don't want to critique it like that, because it is these women's real lives. So I don't want to be like, ugh, the narrative is annoying, because like it's these women's real lives. And I do think elements of it are very relatable to a lot of women, I would imagine. But it's not making me want to read it in between me reading it. Like when I'm actively reading it, it's, you know, a decent read. But when I'm not reading it, I'm not itching to pick it back up. Like I'm always finding something else I'd rather be doing or should be doing. And I'll like read a chapter and then I'll be like, oh, I'll take a little break. And then I won't go back to it for the rest of the day. Or I'll go, no, I do want to read. I'll read that after I watch this episode of Murdoch Mysteries. And then I'll just watch 5 episodes of Murdoch Mysteries instead. So it's taking me a while. I'm sure other people would speed through this because they'd go, you know, I want to read this book, but I don't want to like dwell on all the bad stuff, so I'm gonna just get through it. But my brain seems to be going, oh, this is a lot. And instead I'm like taking my time. I don't think that's entirely the book's fault. I do think there's also just a lot of me over the past month being like busy on some days when like I am more inclined to want to read. Like I actually just can't because I'm doing other stuff. And then also just me being a massive procrastinator. But yeah, overall, at this point I do just want to be finished with it because it has just taken me so long to get through it. I'm taking off my shoes, that's why I'm suddenly going all over the place. So yeah, I'm like, I've got a third of the book left, which is ridiculous. But I think it could be one of those cases where it takes me like ages to read like the first half of a book, and then I can read like the second half in like 2 days, when the first half took me 2 weeks, you know? So I'm hoping that's the case with this book.
I finished Three Women this morning. Oh my goodness, that's great sun. And I really don't know how I feel about it. And I've sort of sat with my thoughts and I've read some reviews to get other people's opinions. And I still don't know how I feel about it. Hopefully by the time I get home I can like at least think of certain ways to express my thoughts and feelings about it. But I don't know that it's going to be like a conclusive review either way. But I do have like good points and bad points, so it's going to be more of like a discussion ending to this vlog. But yeah, I'll share my thoughts when I get back to my house.
So as I said in the previous clip, I finished Three Women this morning and feel very mixed feelings about it. It is one of those books that I've said throughout this vlog that I don't know that I can say I enjoyed it, because like the topics discussed within it and the things that these women are sharing about their lives are so personal, so sad, very uncomfortable, unsettling in some instances. So I was never like enjoying myself or liking the book that much, but it was very readable in terms of the way it was written. I do sort of want to know why the author decided to write it almost as if it was fiction, and not in more of like a interview transcript kind of format. But I do think it was an interesting choice, and I've never personally read anything in this style before, any non-fiction in a almost fictionalized storytelling style. So that was interesting. It was an interesting experience. I would definitely read more non-fiction that was written in this way. In terms of the content, it's like I don't want to say like why was this written, why was this made, because I do think women's stories are important, as Reese Witherspoon says, and I do hope that this was like cathartic for these women, for Maggie, Lena and Sloane, and that maybe this gave them like closure or an element of like getting their stories out there. If that helped them in any way, I would be very happy for these women in that respect. But I do sort of go, what is the purpose of this, you know? Because like if it was to talk about women's different sexual desires, I don't know that this fully does that, because a critique I've seen in several reviews from other people is that like this doesn't massively talk about women's sexual desires. With Lena's storyline, we sort of get that in that she is very unhappy in her marriage to her husband, and her husband doesn't want to like kiss her, and he doesn't want to have sex with her that often, but she has that desire to want to feel loved and be touched, etc., and so she starts an affair. So I think her storyline is very much about sexual desire, but with Maggie, it's not really. It's just about this horrible thing that happened to her when she was a child, when she was a teenager, being like groomed into this relationship with her teacher. And then with Sloane, like there's elements of her expressing sexual desire in there, especially when she's talking about like having read 50 Shades of Grey, and that like making her realise that maybe what she and her husband did was like a kink, and like that sort of helped her process things, which is like good if it helped you, but let's not rely on 50 Shades of Grey. But at the same time, she does talk about like how like her husband gets her to sleep with these men, and there are quite a few times where she says like it's sometimes with men that she has no interest in, or doesn't find attractive, or doesn't really want to, and the only thing that's like making her do it is because she knows that her husband likes it, and like any enjoyment she gets out of it is through her husband's enjoyment. Which is again like, is that really about her desire, or is that just about her being like, I don't want to like push narratives onto it, but like being used by her husband and men for sex? So I do sort of agree with the critiques that are like, is this book actually about sexual desire, or is it just about women's sex lives? And in several instances in here, those sex lives are actually based on like abuse and assault, which is very difficult and uncomfortable to read about. And on that note, like there's quite a lot of like sex scenes in here, and I don't know that they were all necessary, because I get including them, and that's not me being like prudish, because I enjoy a good well-written sex scene in like romance novels and things like that. But in here, like a lot of the sex scenes were very in detail about like exactly what happened and the positions they were in and stuff like that. But it was just like these men mistreating these women, like whether physically or emotionally, and I don't know that I needed to read so many instances of it. So that, yeah, was something that didn't super sit well with me. And also, if we're going with this, it's women talking about their sexual desires and it's representative of women. There was a lot in here that I did think I could connect to, or I could like recognize or relate to, not necessarily within like my own experiences, but that I have like other women I know in my life, in real life. I recognized like behaviors or instances, moments that did relate to these. So it's like there is stuff in here that I think generally women can relate to, but again, several critiques I saw, especially one by Roxanne Gay on Goodreads, was that like it's three women, but it's three white American women. So if we were trying to go for let's look at women more widely, it would have been more interesting to have more diversity within the women, because even at the end, like the author makes a point of, especially in regards to like Maggie's case, when we're talking about like abuse and assault and violations of women, women generally aren't heard, and if they are, it's like the rich, white,
like privileged women, and I'm just like, okay, you make that point, so you're aware of like it's white privileged women who are given more of a platform or heard more, and yet that's like what we've got here. Because Sloane definitely is a like fairly well off white woman. She owns her own business. She has like a more well off family. Lena has her own house and stuff. Maggie is not so privileged in that respect, but we do have just 3 white women sharing their perspectives. And so I do agree that if we're going for it's about women and desire, then it could have benefited from being more diverse. And like maybe the author's original sample size of women was more diverse, because she does talk about how certain women like dropped out of being interviewed, and so maybe they were not just white women. And again, the main relationships in here are heterosexual. Sloane does talk about having been in relationships or like sexual relationships with women, and there is an instance in this where she does sleep, her and her husband sleep with a woman, and then she sleeps with a couple, like a man and a woman couple, so she's not straight presumably, but all the big important relationships in here are between these women and men, and so a lot of like the narrative is centered around men, which not my favorite thing when we're talking about women and their desires. Based on like having diversity within stories, if we're talking about like women and their sexual desires, I know it was dependent on the women that she interviewed and what their like stories are, what their lives were, but I do think it would have been nice if there was just like a positive story in here. And I know that it's like shades of grey, not 50, but like everyone's lives aren't good or bad, or there's questions of like morality in how the women treat other people, and definitely how they're treated, and so it's not all like good or bad or one thing or the other. But I do think if there had been like a happier, more positive story about a woman having sex, having sexual desires, and not just a woman being sort of in an odd relationship with her husband where she not all the time, like quite unhappily sometimes, sleeps with other people. A woman who is so unhappy in her marriage, she is having an affair with a man who doesn't treat her well either, and then a young woman who's like coming to terms with being groomed by her teacher when she was younger. It's all just very uncomfortable and upsetting to read. That if there had been one story that was more about a woman taking control and owning her sexuality and her desire and her like power, I think that could have added more like balance, or more things up for discussion, different like views, that kind of thing. But maybe the women that the author talked to, there wasn't any of that, or it wasn't, I guess, as interesting because there wasn't as much drama, which I guess you need if you're like fictionalizing almost some non-fiction. So yeah, I have really mixed feelings about this. I sort of want to get someone else to read it so I can talk to them about it. I think again this could be an interesting like book club book maybe, but deals with so many difficult topics that I wouldn't just say like anyone can read this, because there's so much stuff about grooming, like an adult minor relationship, sexual assault, rape, affairs. There's like deaths of family members of the women in here, suicide, eating disorders. There's so much in here that could be triggering to people, that this is not just like a general, people should read this and see what they think. I would go into this with caution if you think any of those things will affect you. But yeah, it's I landed on a 3-star for it because I just sort of don't know how I feel. It wasn't bad, but I didn't come away going, wow, you know? So I feel like 3 is neutral, it's average. I feel like this is one of those books that's going to stick with me and I'm going to think about a lot, but not because I'm like, it's one of the greatest books I've ever read, but just because I will always be like, what did I think of that book? You know? Or like, well, these women's stories are so intense that I think they are going to stick with me. But yeah, in an odd way. So yeah, that was 3 Women by Lisa Taddeo. If this sounds like something you're interested in, and like all those trigger warnings are things that you think you'd be fine reading, by all means, like, it was an interesting thing to read. And if you like the idea of like non-fiction being written almost as if it's fiction, then I do think that this is readable and would be an interesting one to pick up. So yeah, that's where I'm leaving this, with an odd, I don't really know how I feel. I do still maintain that the cover is gorgeous. I really like the cover. But yes, that is this odd ending to this vlog. But thank you for watching, and I will see you soon with another video. Bye.